Hi, I'm Richard Fox, and welcome to the Conscious Capitalism panel on creating profit through purpose. Today, I am pleased to be joined by some leaders in the Houston business community to discuss how they lean into purpose to drive value for their business and teams. We have with us Bethany Andell, President of Savage Brands, Shaun Castillo, President of Preferred Technologies, Christy Nolan, Director of Digital Transformation with NRG, and Devlin Liles, President of Improving Houston. I'll be asking each of the panelists, I'll ask questions of each of the panelists and welcome you to do so as well. In the Q&A feature on the side of your screen, there's a button to submit a question and a list that you can vote on as well. We will be using a mixture of prepared questions and those from the audience. Let's get started. Bethany, Conscious Capitalism has a guiding principle of stakeholder orientation, focusing on all stakeholders, including customers, employees, vendors, and investors, rather than just revenue and return on investment. Can you share an example of needing to balance the needs of your stakeholders versus your business's bottom line?
Sure. I think the premise of this, and I think John Mackey, I heard from the CEO of Whole Foods and one of the founders of Conscious Capitalism, talk about this in a way that if you're thinking about your stakeholder orientation and the needs of all your stakeholders and not thinking about your business strategy in terms of trade-offs between different stakeholders, that you can come up with some really creative ways to run your business more successfully in which everyone wins. So I'll just keep this really relevant, I think, to today. Your relationship with suppliers. So it's very easy right now. We've been thinking a lot about our relationship with employees, obviously with the flexibility we've had to provide and what's going on with COVID and health and safety. And we're also thinking a lot about customers because we tend to have a customer first mindset in a lot of businesses. Suppliers, though, those are the partners that you've built relationships with over time, hopefully. And if you have, then when you think about this kind of stakeholder model and balancing the needs, then how are you thinking about your relationship with them in this time? So my specific example is, I think our reptile brain, our fight or flight brain would say, okay, right now I've got to focus on conserving cash and cost containment. What's one of the quickest ways I can do that? I could string along my vendors, right? It's easy to say we're going to pay late on these things. Well, if you don't have a conversation with your vendors and you just do that without any thought process to how that might affect them and their business and then their capacity to serve you, you can see where things could start falling apart. So if you've developed really good relationships over time because you care about all your stakeholders, including your vendors, then you have a relationship in which you can go have a conversation with them and come up with something really creative that both of you end up being okay and weathering kind of the storm together. So for example, we had a client that declared bankruptcy and we owed a vendor a significant amount of money, and that was on us to get them paid. But instead of just saying, we're not going to pay you until our client pays, or telling them, sorry, we lost, you lost. Instead, we were able to have a really candid conversation and come up with a solution for paying that out and timing that was mutually okay and didn't do much damage to both of our businesses. So really we're in it together. And I know that because I did that, they're going to become better partners to me. And ultimately, I'll get better pricing with them. I'll get quicker turnarounds, better service, responsiveness, and all of those things ultimately will improve my bottom line. So I think that's a really good example of, how some of the people in your ecosystem, your stakeholders, can get lost in the shuffle. And if you think about it all holistically, as in dominoes might fall, then you can come up with really good ways to involve them in some creative solutions.
Great, thank you. So organizations within companies also have to balance the need of their stakeholders. Shaun, how have you seen this play out at Preferred Technologies?
So the challenge with business is it is just a massive amount of transactions. We execute in business, but it all boils down to relationship. So we preach relationship and we teach how to have good, proper relationship. So it's establishing expectations, desired outcomes. Here's what we want out of this relationship. And it's also establishing boundaries. So we say, hey, this is how we do business. These are some values we have. These are some lines we are not going to cross, and we're not going to do business if you cross those lines either. And then communicate. I love what Bethany was saying about vendors and how this has played out during COVID. We have some really, really great vendors. and we tend to do most of our business with just a few. Well, we made a decision as an executive team that because of the uncertainty, we want to hoard cash. We want to retain as much cash as we can. But hey, these great relationships we have with our vendors, we're going to want them after things settle down and we get back to some kind of normalcy. So we just had the conversation and we expressed our desire. Hey, look, we are trying to preserve our company. We want to maintain as much cash as we can. And we were very upfront with them, just like Bethany said. Hey, look, it's easy. It's low-hanging fruit for us just to string you out. What can you afford for us to do? And we had that great conversation with our vendors, and we came to some mutually agreeable terms. And I think the relationships are even stronger now because we practice what we preach when it comes to having those kind of relationships.
Wonderful. So I'd like to ask this question to Devlin and Christy both. The world we lived in radically changed just a few short months ago. As leaders, how have you reacted to this change in crisis? Change in crisis will often define not just you, but also the people you lead and your stakeholders. I'd like to know what changes you have made for your team, organization, or company to react to this crisis. Has it affected your overall purpose or approach and effectiveness? Devlin, let's start with you.
You're on mute.
Okay. Well, how about Christy? Let's have you answer this question. How has the recent times affected your approach and effectiveness?
Yeah, Michael. The short answer is I don't think I'm the same leader today that I was at the beginning of 2020. I had never had an experience leading a large virtual team through a total crisis of uncertainty. And so without realizing, I think the journey of conscious leadership has been where my discovery has really leaned into. And I would say my purpose as a leader has changed. This week has been full of preparation for Hurricane, Laura. Lots of mobilization in the energy space. We have storm center websites, a lot of work that we're doing there. But even in that's predictable work for us. That's predictable, understandable what we need to do to make sure that we're providing the best power outage communications, the best storm tips, anything we can do to help that. And that's predictable. But this crisis has really arose around COVID and the pandemic. It changed and it made me recognize the type of leader that I am in uncertainty. And it also made me quite aware of the way I needed to manage the teams and help lead them through fear and conversations. And, in addition to that, it's also highlighted areas of new kind of weakness or things that I need to work on. My strengths as a leader have not necessarily been in that virtual space, right? I am a stronger person face to face. And I found that these last 6 months, my ability to hold those relationships, as Shaun was talking about, it's all about that relationship. It's all about that ability to express an intent that you can't get in a 6-sentence I am. And so what I found is that I've had to change that. I've had to change that reaction to the way that I fuel inspiration. I've had to really lean into, what conscious capitalism talks about around the moments of crisis that help you discover how to be a better leader. And so both finding new growth opportunities and really finding new ways to provide patience and inspiration have helped me change my purpose.
Fantastic. Devlin, I'd like to give you an opportunity to answer this question.
I appreciate it. I found my mute button. And so I've often said internal to improving that I don't believe that crisis builds character. I believe that crisis reveals it and gives you an opportunity to make that shine. And the COVID and the pandemic and the ensuing economic outcomes that came from that did just that. It really allowed us to go, who are we at our core when there's risk, when there's uncertainty, when there's fear, when there's doubt? Who are we came to the surface. It was the first conversation when we sat down as an executive team at the end of March. It was, I guess, mid-March, and really went, all right, how are we gonna live into our values was the first of that conversation. And and it changed quite a bit of what we were doing. We put some strategic initiatives on hold. We adjusted others. We started new ones in knowing that we were going to have more people available that we typically don't. They're on projects and those kind of things, but with projects ramping down, a big impact to travel with several of our large clients, we were going to have these people available and we were going to keep them, but we wanted to make sure that they weren't just twiddling their thumbs and worrying and anxiety and all those. So we were able to kind of repurpose that as strategic investment and start working on some of the things internally. We also realized that in the shift to virtual, there's a lot of disconnect that comes with that. When I'm talking to a video screen and I'm not getting to hug my friends and I'm not getting to, work side by side with the people I love working with, how do we stay connected? How do we continue to pour into these folks? And that was through personal outreach and making sure that we were doing that more frequently, but also we've launched several additional leadership growth programs to help folks get through this, additional training programs on remote work, but also around consulting skills and those kind of pieces to really continue to pour in and grow that set of our stakeholders who right now maybe feel a little more disconnected from us than they typically would. The vendor piece of it that Shaun and Bethany both talked about was a huge part of it as well. So I think it really showed up well. And we started focusing a lot less on efficiency of, hey, I need to get done with this. Let me shoot back the one sentence answer to an email, and started focusing more on being effective with the people. It was approaching it kind of a human first approach and making sure that our clients knew we cared about them and that, you were going to have to worry about rates and you were going to have to reduce projects and maybe even cancel them. But that didn't change the fact that we cared about you and we wanted to be there. And so I think those things came out, and the overall purpose for us of changing the perception of the IT professional might have actually gotten better through this because we were able to show that character difference in a way that without the crisis, I don't know that it would have been as apparent.
Fantastic. So one of the arguments against capitalism as a system that we hear about is a focus on short-term profits at the expense of stakeholders. Bethany, as a leader of a conscious capitalism company, how does Savage push against this perception?
Well, I think we all have Wall Street and high frequency trading and activists to further this out in the market. And I should say my company's purpose, Savage's purpose, I know this sounds a little bit lofty, but it's to revolutionize corporate America. Our mission is to reverse the bad rap that capitalism has. Society has just bastardized the definition to me of capitalism and got stuck on this notion that a capitalist or capitalism or a capitalist society is only there to seek profit without the means to do anything to benefit other stakeholders or benefit society as a stakeholder. And I always go back to the Conscious Capitalism credo because I think it really outlines how I feel about business and capitalism and our system, and that business's very nature is created to add value and elevate society. So the Conscious Capitalism credo is that business is inherently good because it creates value. It's ethical because it's based on voluntary exchange. It's noble because it can elevate our existence. And it's heroic because it lifts people out of poverty and creates prosperity. So that itself, when you think about capitalism having a purpose, we talk a lot about core purpose, that in itself kind of keeps my head above the fray and me focused on our own purpose. And as an investor and owner of my business, it's easy to get kind of caught up in short-term profit or long-term profit as it is, but how we kind of push through that and how I see a lot of companies push through that, including the people I'm on the call with, is that we have a very clear picture of what our brand stands for, and we can communicate a very clear purpose beyond making money. It's not a selfish look at what we're trying to accomplish as the business. So once we know that we can have an impact on the world beyond making money, to me, money becomes the basically outcome. So somehow we've put kind of profit at the front end of the equation versus profit at the end, because purpose should drive performance and engagement in the company, and performance and engagement in the company drives profit. So everyone should benefit at the end, and purpose can be a multiplier. And the second piece of that is really, And I think people forget about this, measuring everything. So you want to demonstrate your commitment to achieving your purpose and to success being something beyond money. You actually have to tie value and tie measurements to that so you can demonstrate that, especially to investors, that it is producing something. One of my favorite examples, and I know they're a poster child, but Southwest Airlines, they very directly tie compensation to their ability to serve their mission and live their values. And that's all throughout the organization, even with executive comp. So there's a total alignment of what they stand for, what their mission is, what their expectations are from a values perspective with their employees, and how that translates into profit for the company and better compensation for their employees. And then the other piece is really targeting and attracting the right investors, people with your aligned interests and values. So you see this a lot when companies, conscious companies, go and think about selling their company, right? A business owner is trying to get out of their company, and you don't want it to all fall apart because you've sold it to a company that's going to tear it apart or focus only on, productivity and not some of the other things that are the glue of the culture. And so really paying attention to who you're trying to attract into your ecosystem and people to invest in you is really important, that they're more aligned with your kind of long-term strategy versus this short-term gain. So I see that, that's how Savage approaches it, and that's how I see other really great sustained brands approach it as well. I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to be remembered for how much money I made. I want to be remembered for the impact I've had on those around me in the broader world. So that's what I'm trying to build, and I think that we have a better company because of it, and we'll make more money ultimately because of it.
Thank you. Devlin, what is Improving's approach to pushing back against this perception of short-term gain at the expense of all else?
So I've come to believe that when we measure things, it drives behavior. That's one of the reasons we create OKRs and KPIs and all of those great three-letter acronyms for management. But we need to look at do the measurements we have today serve the behavior we need? Yesterday's solutions drove today's problems. That doesn't mean yesterday's solutions were bad, right? Capitalism does all of the things that Bethany was talking about. It is fundamentally good. But we need to take a longer view to it. When we started talking about, the ability to trade the value of a company on a stock exchange constantly, there's times where you can trade the same company across the globe, and you start getting into, all right, how do we maximize the gains today? That starts to change the way things are approaching that if you're not careful as a leadership team. And so one of the things that we've done in Improving in this is we've started to approach the confusion and the lack of awareness in what those trade-offs are. It was mentioned earlier, there's trade-offs between stakeholders. If we go in and we're going, hey, we want to help you, the natural reaction is that we're trying to sell something. And so we actually have to bat down some of that confusion of going, no, we believe as a community that we are all stronger and the pie gets bigger, and I don't have to win, or I don't have to lose for you to win. You don't have to lose for me to win. That we can find a way that both of us end up in a better place. Now, that might be if we're playing a win-lose game, I could take 100% and you get 0, but it's a hard fight for us to win that business. Or we could go, you know what? We both get 50% and we both win. It means taking that longer term view, because now the pie is bigger, there's collaboration, there's additional value. And so when you look at that for all of the stakeholders, am I looking at my employees' families as a stakeholder in our company? Are we making sure that we get spouses and kids and friends engaged? Because when that person is stressed, when that person's working on a project that might have some extra hours, that's the support system that's going to help our business. But have we invested in them as a stakeholder in our business, or did we just go, oh, that's their problem, right? It's that differential. It's that lack of awareness of going, no, these people pour into us, even though they're not visible, even though they're not on payroll, they're not a vendor, they're a part of our ecosystem that's critical to our success in the worst of times. And they're also the people that we get to celebrate with in the best of times. And when you start having those conversations on a regular basis with clients, going, hey, here's the things that improving has learned over time. Would you like us to come and teach them? And they go, yeah, how much would it be? It's like, no, it's free. We do those lunch and learns all the time. Things like this Conscious Capitalism panel, and going, let's pull together and share these ideas, because I honestly believe that if we come together and we continue to seek profit, like we definitely have to make a profit, because otherwise the business goes out of business. And with COVID and all that, we're seeing that more and more across the world. We have to make a profit, just like human beings to live have to breathe. But it doesn't mean that our company should only exist for that, the same way a human being doesn't exist just to breathe. It means that, all right, so we're breathing now. What value do we add to the world? How are we, to Bethany's point, making a positive impact on all the people in that sphere? Are improvers happier and healthier because they're engaged here versus working somewhere else? And so it's taking that and going, all right, we're going to remove the confusion, we're going to remove the lack of awareness, and we're going to talk about the bigger picture. There's a selfish piece in that. Capitalism is the noun. By painting the bigger picture and talking about it, we believe we bring a better offering to market than anybody else does. But if we only talk about the one piece, the price, the time, those kind of things, we're playing a game that's going to incentivize us to do the wrong things. And so broadening the definition of success has definitely pushed against the idea that we have to optimize for the short term. And it's led to 11 years on the Inc. 500, 5,000 list. Like if you look at the results from conscious businesses, the long view typically leads to massively better success than the short view in the long view.
Devlin, I think it's really interesting that when you were talking about industry, and I know improving's purpose, to think about your competitors in your stakeholder group, because you're right. I mean, one of my competitors could do great harm to my entire industry. There's nothing that disappoints me more to hear bad news about one of my competitors, like something that they did that was unethical, or something that they did and the project wasn't successful, so they got fired, because it hurts my industry, it hurts the reputation I've got. And so it's just interesting to think about that interaction and how all of you as an industry, whatever industry you're in, can do an entire lift, and tides rise. And I just really liked that point, because I think about that a lot, of how much we can hurt each other just within our own industry a lot of times.
Absolutely.
That's great. That ties in quite a lot to culture, which is actually what we'll be bringing up next here. Culture is an often overlooked driver of value. A conscious culture fosters a value of trust and cooperation. It removes friction. Christy, is there a piece of your team's culture that you're particularly proud of and are willing to share?
Yeah, trust and empathy, infinite number of ways to get that recipe correct, but so very important and so difficult to do. This last year at NRG, we've really focused on customer empathy, that external customer. And I think that we've done a great job in understanding how, in the moment of somebody needing to make sure that their power is on, that they have a good plan, that they are, a good brand that represents them, that we've really excelled in that space. But I'm exceptionally proud of the work that we've done on that internal customer, of really learning to empathize in a space that's very different, right? Like this all has been brought to us in this little bitty screen where we now combine our public professional life with our private life. We're now on these sort of calls and we mute because we have the dog barking and another package at the door, right? So that sort of internal empathy that we have, I see in the day-to-day interactions of the team. I see when we're having large stakeholder reviews and that 2-year-old screaming in the background is just very fluidly picked up by another presenter that will step in and talk and give them that coverage and that reassurance that they understand what they're going through. And so I think that our customer empathy has grown in the space of internal. I think that the team has taught us how to really bring that humanity to every product that we've delivered. In April, we completely redid our entire product roadmap for the rest of the year. And so we developed a full online contribution tool that allows all of our NRG customers to donate to different relief funds, as well as donate to people's financial assistance so that they can pay their bill. This summer is really tough for those residential customers. You know, here in Texas, we have scorching heat, we have high electricity bills, and we have concerns that we can't pay for that. So the need for humanity in our products and services is real. And it's often a challenging thing for an IT developer or somebody who's in the Scrum Master role or something like that to really get. And I think that window into our own personal lives and the way that we're connecting that public and private role here is the tool getting us to be more empathetic.
Great. Thank you. Bethany, can you provide any advice to leaders that are wanting to build and strengthen the cultures in their organizations?
Sure. Earlier I mentioned, and this is what we do, companies first need to be clear, leadership teams need to be clear about their core purpose, their mission, their vision, their values and behaviors. And that's a fun process to go through, I'd say. But in building a culture, really, to me, it's about where the rubber meets the road, because none of us want to be in an organization where these words are just lip service, that this is a defining moment for companies. And we do a lot of work in the B2B space, and what I know down to my toes, to my very essence, is that your people are your brand. It touches on, Christy, what you're saying, right? Your internal stakeholder, your culture. I think it was Patrick Lencioni that said, culture is the last sustainable corporate advantage. It can't be imitated. It can't be duplicated. It is yours wholly. And so when I think about your product or service, you know, people can imitate that. If it wasn't good quality, or if it didn't, you know, meet your value proposition, you'd be out of business. But your people become, and your culture become your magic sauce. So what scares me, you know, when companies come up with their purpose, their values, is that they just, I'm sure we've all worked with a company where the poster's on the break room that says, lists all the values, but there's not, the CEO can't even tell you what they are, right? Or you go to the town hall and they put some slides up about how important the core values are, and nothing comes from that. It's just, we've communicated it, check, you know, one and done. So where I'm really interested in culture is how you can see organizations walk the talk, you know, where they really, Devlin, you talked about it too. I know improving is big on this, right? So you have to make sure that all of these things are part of your cultural DNA. So where I think of this is a couple kind of things that you could do within your organization. One is for leadership teams, we all know what, as leaders, we all know what we want from our employees, but giving some thought when you're thinking about culture of what you want for your employees. Devlin, you mentioned the family as an ecosystem, right? What do you want for your employees? And that can really help you frame out how these values show up, some decisions you make about the experience, and thinking of yourself as a servant leader in that conversation when you're doing that. The other piece, and I've seen this unfortunately, is a leadership team that thinks somehow they're excused from the behaviors and the values of the company. So everyone else should do these things, but you know, I have an excuse in the corner office and I don't really have to show up that way. Well, as leaders, we know everyone is watching us, and even in our family as leaders at home, you know, my kids are watching me and they're going to be modeling my behavior and how I show up for them. So just kind of keeping that in the back of the mind. And the other thing that's very specific to me that's super important is thinking of what you're communicating versus what the actual experience is. So when was the last time in your organization or your department or even for your team thought about what your company is communicating about itself from a values perspective, or even just what you offer, and thinking through the entire kind of chain of experiences, the journey of an employee. So you hear all the time that people get recruited to a company, they're really excited to show up on the first day, and they don't even have a computer or an email address set up for them. No one takes them to lunch. Like, thinking about your values against your experience, and you can literally with your team write out the entire journey of your employee and see where you are disconnected or even contradicting For example, contradictions we see all the time with performance reviews or compensation, where employees are being told that to behave one way, but then they're rewarded for something completely contradictory to that. You see this a lot in manufacturing and oil and gas, which is the incentive is around being on time and on budget with orders, but they're saying safety is a value and quality is a value and you should stop work and all of these things. So they're trying to just drive a certain value or behavior, but they're compensating for something else or incentivizing something else. And these are really easy things to start identifying, and then you can make a decision. What of these things will have the most immediate impact or might be the easiest thing to do with the most impact? And what are the things that we really need to prioritize and work on changing? Because until you do that, no one's going to believe you in your organization. And if your employees don't believe you, you're certainly not going to have an engaged and differentiated culture. So that really, all that to say, walk the talk and make sure that the rubber's meeting the road.
Hey. Building on that leadership into culture, a conscious business cannot exist without conscious leadership. How have you inspired positive transformations with your team and organization? And what effects have you noticed from your stakeholders? Shaun, let's hear from you first.
I took a note that this is my first time interacting with Bethany. Need to spend some time with you. You and I think a lot of alike, and I think you're speaking a lot of truth, so appreciate your thoughts. And kind of back up to what Christy said as well, culture and tie some of these things together. We are a business, we design, install, and service security systems, primarily in the enterprise space. It's about our people, right? Looking at it from a business perspective, our people are an asset, and that asset in the state of Texas is very risky, right? It's a right to work state. They can come and go. So purely from a, I guess, negative capitalistic point of view, I'm not going to invest a lot in that asset because it's too risky. It's even compounded in our industry because we have a finite amount of talent coming in. Our industry is in high demand, so we've got more of a microscope on our employees. But we said, hey, look, the way we mitigate the risk to that asset, to our employees leaving, is culture, right? We build a culture where they want to be. So we invest heavily in that. And that leads into my answer to your question. I think first and foremost, I love the statement, watch me, right? As a leader, you lead by example. Like you lead from the front. I'm the first one in. I'm the last one to leave. And I went to the military academy. I grew up in the Army, and that's what we taught. And that teaching is from literally hundreds of years of war fighting. So it's well thought out doctrine, and I believe in it. Be the example. You can't, like Bethany said, be in the corner office doing something different than you're asking your employees to do. And sometimes that means sacrificing. Doing things you don't like doing, or you may feel like you're elevated above. You don't have to do that anymore because of your position. Well, it's just flat out wrong. And I don't think you can express empathy, back to what Christy was saying, without, let me hit the definition of empathy, right? I'm gonna go there and be with you wherever you may be. So you've got to have that mentality as a leader. Go out there and do it. As a business leader, you have to put your money and your time where your mouth is. You have to invest in those things. So if it's important, purpose statements, culture, core values, however you frame it, you have to put your time and your money into it. And people have to see this person truly cares about these things. He's spending his money there. She's spending her time there. And people are not dumb. They see those things. And when they see you spending money, when they see you spending time, they know it's important, and they'll emulate those things. And I don't think, I've come to this realization, I love to work with smart people. I love to work with people who can figure things out on their own. But I've resigned myself to the fact that some of these things, like our purpose statement that we've had for 4 years, I see it multiple times every single week. I have to communicate these things over and over and over. And I have to ask our people to communicate these things over and over and over. And, part of me says, they're smart people, they get it, sure, they just move on, but it's not. Our role as a leader is to communicate those things. This is our core, this is fundamentally who we are, and you just have to remind it. I mean, we as a people need to be reminded of things often. My wife knows well that I must be reminded quite often. So I just follow her lead.
Fantastic. Devlin, what about you and Improving's leadership approach to a conscious business and transformation and of the teams and the organization?
Consciousness is hard. Dreaming is easy. And as leaders, to Shaun's point, sometimes that's going to mean that we're doing the things we don't enjoy doing, especially in the Houston space with the oil and gas kind of follow on, 1-2 punch, COVID, and then oil demand dropping. A lot of leaders had to work through layoffs and evaluation of, are we going to have cash flow and all of those things, and Improving was no different in that. And having to enter into those conversations and those tough situations with awareness of my choices here are going to impact people, right? They're not Excel spreadsheet line items, they're people. Now, they show up in that spreadsheet, but that's not what they are. And that awareness comes with responsibility, it comes with accountability, it comes with some emotional pain. And so teaching the team and the organization to help deal with that pain of, we've made these choices and it's the right choice, but it still hurts, right? It still doesn't feel great that we weren't able to achieve the full dream of nothing goes wrong ever. And being there to walk with folks through those things, I think has really inspired that positive change in the team and how we approach problems. We were talking about trying to keep folks engaged, and one of the suggestions was around doing more virtual, happy hours and trivia nights and board games. And while all those are good and valuable, and we're doing a lot of those things, it was the conscious question of that leadership to go, but is that why they're here? Is that going to make them feel loved and feel valued by Improving, right? And it was, okay, we need to go further. And so we launched new leadership programs. We're like, that's going to make them feel invested in and loved. We started reaching out personally to quite a few of our folks in our leadership team, and I'm doing the same thing. Is I've got a couple of time boxes that I just sit down and I type out emails. I'm like, hey, how you doing? Or I'll set up a coffee or reach out and just be like, hey, I was thinking about you this morning, want to know that you're cared for and loved. I'm here if you need anything. And the reactions to that from the improvers that get those messages, to the clients that get those messages, to the just folks that we randomly know from the community that get those messages, has been phenomenal, right? I'll drop a 2-line, because I'm fairly high D on the disc profile. So like my 2-line email that's a long email. I'll drop a 2-line email just checking in with somebody, be like, how are you doing? How's your wife's surgery or whatever? And I'll get back paragraphs. And it's then incumbent upon me to live into that of going, I care about this person. I'm going to read through that. I'm going to call them. I'm going to see if they need any help. And it's that transformation, because it makes it easier for all of us to bear the weight of what we're going through versus some of us. And our stakeholders have responded to that hugely, from engaging and really living into that. Our leadership team and a whole bunch of improvers outside the leadership team have taken it upon themselves to make sure folks stay connected and reach out, make sure they're cared for. But our clients have come back and gone, so this is different and weird. I appreciate you doing it, but like, I don't understand why it's different, but I want to, because I want to be that kind of different. And so we've had great conversations about the human impacts of what we're going through, and making sure that those don't get lost in the transactions, because with a video and a screen, it's really easy for me to do the transactional work. And there's a lot of barriers now to doing the interpersonal work. Like Christy mentioned, being in the room with somebody, you can tell if they're having a bad morning. But if they're having a bad morning and they jump on the video call and their video's not on, and there's 3 other folks whose video's not on because of bandwidth issues, I can't tell the difference between bandwidth issues and having a bad morning the way I could in a room. And I can't reach out and go, hey, I love you and I'm here for you. And so I think it's the being aware enough to go, I'm going to follow up with these folks and make sure they're okay. And that could be as simple as a 5-minute conversation. That could lead to hours. But that's where we're at as a team, and that means leaning in a bit. But I think that's the impact that we're seeing is when we lean in just a little bit, and it is met with a groundswell of appreciation and return of that caring. And that genuine care comes in great bounds back at you.
I think that's huge, Devlin, because you're not after anything, right? It's kind of like you were saying earlier, it's not to sell anybody anything, it's just to show that you care, and then we're all going through something together, and be a little bit vulnerable as a leader, which a lot of us aren't used to going there. But I just think that you create such loyalty and love through those types of conversations that don't take any time at all, honestly. And people just want to be asked.
Absolutely. And
right.
The irony is that it is done from that heart and that stakeholder and wanting to be there with them, but it leads to outcomes that we measure on that spreadsheet.
Absolutely.
Like people stay longer, they feel invested in, they bring problems and solutions to you. Clients come to you and go, hey, you were there for me in a tough time and I got this project coming down I want some help with. It's not that we're chasing that project because you can't predict where those come from, but behaving in a conscious capitalist way actually creates the better capitalist outcome. And I think that's the piece we've missed in some of the conversation over the last 3 or 4 decades, especially in the United States.
Great. So we're going to take a couple of moments to pivot to some of the questions submitted online. So we have one here. It says, do you also vet your clients and strategic partners against your values? Do you have guidelines or protocols around when you'll say no to potential customers or partners? If so, can you describe how that works and how it's working for you? Bethany, earlier you were discussing about how the larger ecosystem affects Savage Brands and what you're doing. So I'll direct this question to you first.
Sure. The answer is yes, unequivocally yes. Once we got real clear on our values and behaviors, because the behaviors piece often get lost, to really understand how those values come to life, we went back and did an assessment of our vendors, of our clients. So we kind of created this benchmark and really looked at kind of 3 dimensions, right? This values alignment, which to us is like having partly having fun. Like, do we enjoy the client? Is there chemistry? Do we click? Do we treat each other well? Is a values fit, even if we haven't outlined the exact same values? Are we doing good? Do we believe the work is doing something good in society and good for our clients and good for us? And then are we making money? So we kind of did this assessment and made judgments. And the quick answer is yes. And it was a hard lesson for me. We had to fire a client. It was a little too late. It was a big leadership lesson for me. We lost an employee because I tolerated some behaviors from a client that were like truly unacceptable. I mean, strong language, loud, angry, wanted everything right now. It was a mess, and lost an employee because of it. And that was a real mirror in the face for me. And from that point on, I have not hesitated. And my employees feel, talking about culture, they feel protected. They feel like they can come to me with problems. They feel like things will be dealt with, even if it's not necessarily firing a client, but having a hard conversation with a client about some of those things. So yes, the answer is yes. And we have looked at our vendor relationships, kind of full circle back to the first question you asked me, which is rethinking our vendors as partners instead of vendors. Like, I hate that word, vendor. People call me a vendor all the time. And really thinking how we can form partnerships that are mutually beneficial for each other. And when I just relens it even with a word and think of them through my values, we've formed much tighter relationships. So yes.
Right. Now we have another question that is kind of around, like, how do you bring conscious capitalism into your company, especially if you kind of already feel like that your company isn't living into the conscious capitalism values? And should you even try to do that, or should you look for a company that already espouses those values. Christy, I know that you became more into the conscious capitalism nomenclature and philosophy more recently. So can you discuss about how you've seen conscious capitalism move into NRG?
Yeah, I can tell you the wrong way to do it. No. So really the wrong thing that you could do is read the book, bring the book, give it to everybody there and say, this is our new philosophy and this is what we're going to do. And we're going to work on delivering that purpose. And we're going to deliver that purpose by having a session together. Not that we did that at this time, but we've all had experience before where we've tried to bring something to a larger organization like that. But I attended one of these sessions, I think in May or June, where it was so nice to hear the examples of conscious capitalism that we were already doing and not self-identifying. And, some of the leaders within our organization were also on that call and they were like, we do that. We naturally do that. So I would say the first step is an identification of what is true to you in the spirit of this principle. We are a purpose-driven company without needing this phrase of conscious capitalism. And so being able to articulate that and rise that up as to what we do and how it is relevant there gives our leadership and our teams ways to self-identify. And so from there, we find new ways to apply this principle. And so I believe that identifying with what was already true at our company was step one. And then the second was really bringing this in on a slow process. We have change overload, especially this year, where there's so much going on and there's so many terms and acronyms in a sentence. Sometimes you don't even know what the verb is. And so what I would hate to do is bring this as another introduction of that. So instead, making that relevant to every individual holds them accountable to wanting to learn more. And so what we're doing right now is we've introduced the concepts, is that we're just talking about the practical application of these, right? Like, how do we have a purpose-driven company? How do we practice conscious leadership? What do we do from stakeholder communication and stakeholder management? And so that allows us to inspect and adapt. And that also allows us to use this principle as a way to get better in those core areas.
Thank you. As we conclude today, I want to know what final advice you give to the leaders listening in the audience to drive their purpose forward and create value. I'd like to hear from several of you, so let's start with Bethany.
Well, I'm going to be very short and sweet with this one because, and I've already said it, I just really, it's imperative that the experience you deliver matches the words you're saying. And if you can't do that, it goes back to the question Christy was just asked. There's no point in even going through any sort of process to articulate who you are and what you stand for, because it could probably do more harm for you than good when you misspeak your truths, or they're not truths anymore. And so it's readiness to go through this process. It seems really important to me. And if you personally aren't identifying with the values or the purpose of the company you're with, that's another conversation you need to have with yourself as well. So we see a lot of that through this, is once a leadership team comes together and says, this is what we stand for and this is where we're going, and these are our values, everyone has to be aligned to that and committed to it and behind it and role modeling, like Devlin said, or maybe you don't belong in that organization. So those are some hard conversations to have with yourself. But again, I mean, we're too smart as humans, and your employees and your clients are not going to fall for, lip service and spin. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Great, thank you. Shaun, what are your thoughts?
I have many, but I'll keep it kind of brief as well, and back up. I think we don't spend enough time as a culture, as individuals, definitely as a company, to understand what our identity is, to self-reflect and truly come to terms with who we are as a company. I would advise you to do that if you are a leader deciding whether to join a company or not. I think that should be your first question, is who are you? What is your identity? And if they don't have one, maybe that's something you can contribute to that company. But until you truly understand who you are, I don't think anything else matters. I know when I look back over our journey at Preferred Technologies, until we truly established who we were discombobulated. But that allowed us to really narrow in and focus, and I think we've been all the better for it. So that would be my recommendation. Take the time to define your identity.
Thank you. And Christy, what advice would you give for the audience to drive their purpose forward and create value?
I would say to be aware that the rate of change that you are bringing to your organization, to your teams, needs to directly be matched with the rate and the amount of communication, the volume of communication. To Shaun's point, I feel sometimes that I'm a broken record, but to those out there that I'm not. And you have to be aware of that these key concepts, especially with the amount of stuff that we have going on and the amount of change we're trying to lead through our organizations, that requires so much more communication in so many different forms. It is these face-to-face. It may be a meetup in a parking lot where you're social distancing so that you can get that human interaction. It may be a virtual balloon bouquet or any of those kind of things, but it's that different communication channels, that different ways of connecting so that you are aware of how people are accepting your change.
Thank you. And finally, Devlin, would love to hear from you on this.
I feel like the kind of guidance that you've heard is all great, and it lives to what I think kind of the core of this is. And I grew up hearing my father was military, and I'd hear it from him, I'd hear it from the church, I'd hear it in be the change you want to be in the world, or they'll know you by your behavior, right? Judge actions, not words. And all of these were hitting to a core concept that very recently I was rereading some of John Maxwell's leadership stuff, and he talks about when asking people what they would change to make their company more effective, they'll give you processes and products and procedures and people, but rarely will they ever say me. I will change me. To Shaun's point, we need that. It is, if you want to push forward that purpose and that value, it needs to be in you first, right? Are you living those things? Because people today have great BS detectors. Like, they have finely tuned those with Facebook and Instagram and everything else we're exposed to. And so when your actions and your walk don't match the talk, the rest of the conversation is over. So if you're trying to bring this into an organization, you're trying to move that organization forward, you've got to live that, right? And they teach it at West Point, they teach it at Annapolis, they teach it at the Air Force Academy, because for hundreds of years, that's been a way to inspire people in some of the worst crisis moments of their lives. But we can live that as leaders that are looking for that conscious movement of going, we've got to be different. We've got to be the counterexample to every one of the examples of corporate greed and fraud and those kind of things that are used to tear down capitalism, even though capitalism as its core has changed the world in great positive ways. We've got to be the counterexample inside our culture of when we hear something that doesn't align with our values, rather than tolerating it because you get what you tolerate, stepping in and going, no, that's not who we are. Like, that's not okay. Let me talk to you about who we are and see if this still makes sense, because I want you to be here, but you've got to be here if you're okay with these things. It means that there are going to be clients sometimes that we don't do business with because they don't match that up. There's going to be employees that could do the job beautifully, but they don't live our values and they're not going to represent our brand the way we want them to, and that's okay. They'll be a great employee for someone else. But it's in living that out and changing yourself that the rest of it follows, because people will sense that change, and the ones who align on those values and who feel that purpose, they're going to be there. There's an old adage about, trying to inspire somebody is like pushing a boulder up the hill, but trying to motivate somebody who's inspired is like trying to chase down a race car on a bicycle. Like, the purpose and the inspiration will motivate in extreme past your ability to inspire that change if they don't feel the values.
Great, thank you. Well, at this time, I would like to thank our panel, Bethany Andell, Shaun Castillo, Christy Nolan, and Devlin Liles for taking the time to share their thoughts with us today. I'd like to thank each of you who joined us online to watch this panel. Have a great afternoon.